Imagine waking up to the biting cold of a Scandinavian dawn, your breath forming clouds in the icy air. You are surrounded by men whose lives are forged in the fires of battle and hardened by the unforgiving sea. This is not a life for the faint-hearted, and it certainly is not a life for someone used to comfort. Here, every day tests your strength, courage, and cunning. In this story, you will step into the world of the Vikings, warriors feared across Europe. You will experience their mornings, filled with the smell of raw meat, the crunch of frozen ground underfoot, and the constant vigilance required to survive. You will see why only the strongest, cleverest, and bravest could ever hope to join a raid. From the moment the sun barely rises over the fjords, the day demands action. Weakness is punished, hesitation is fatal, and betrayal could cost you your life or your place in the longship. We will follow a single day in the life of a Viking warrior, where every choice can lead to glory or death. By the end, you will understand why living among Vikings is not for the timid. Prepare yourself for a journey through icy mornings, fierce training, and brutal raids. You will feel the sting of cold steel, the roar of battle cries, and the camaraderie of those who have survived together. This is a story that will challenge your imagination and test your nerves. Can you survive even a single day among the Vikings? Hello, welcome to my channel. Before we start, it's a good idea to get into bed and relax. I would also like to ask you to subscribe to my channel, like it, and write in the comments where you are from and what time it is. Thank you. Have a nice viewing. The first light of dawn barely pierced the frozen mists that clung to the fjord. The air was sharp and unyielding, biting at exposed skin with every shallow breath. Even the strongest men flinched, though none admitted it aloud. You woke to a world of ice and shadow, where the comfort of a warm bed was nothing more than a fleeting memory. The smell of damp wool and the tang of raw meat hung in the air, a reminder that life among the Vikings was never gentle. The longhouse was alive with movement. Warriors stirred, rubbing the frost from their eyes, stretching stiff muscles, and checking their weapons for readiness. Every morning began the same way, a cold, harsh ritual of survival. You had to prove, every single day, that you were fit to live. Weakness was noticed immediately, and mercy was a luxury no Viking afforded lightly. Raw meat, still slightly frozen from the night's chill, was laid out on wooden slabs. Hands, calloused and scarred, tore chunks and passed them silently from one man to another. There was no complaint, only the efficiency of those accustomed to hunger. A new recruit would choke at the sight and smell, but the seasoned warriors ate with mechanical precision, gnawing through sinew and gristle as if it were a delicacy. To falter here was a warning sign. Failure to endure the morning meal marked you as a liability. While chewing on a tough slab of reindeer, you had to keep an eye on your fellow warriors. Viking society was brutal, even among kin. Steal a seat at the longship or claim a better oar, and the consequences could be deadly. Eyes darted constantly, measuring strength, judging courage, and calculating who would survive the day's journey. Trust was earned through action, not words, and betrayal was always a threat. The chief of the clan, a towering man with hair the color of storm clouds and eyes like sharpened flint, entered the longhouse. His presence silenced conversation. Every movement, every breath was scrutinized under his gaze. He circled the room slowly, inspecting each warrior. Newcomers trembled, knowing that one misstep could earn a violent rebuke. Some men had been thrown from their posts for a momentary lapse, never seen again in the fjord. The chief's voice, when he spoke, was like thunder rolling across the mountains. Today, he began, we sail. Our longship awaits, and those who are weak will stay behind. The words were simple, but the weight of them pressed down on every shoulder. Survival was selective. Only those who could endure the freezing waters, the fatigue of rowing, and the brutality of raids would join the voyage. Weakness had no place here. After the chief's inspection, training commenced. Wooden swords clashed against shields as men practiced techniques honed through years of repetition. The sound of leather and wood striking metal echoed through the longhouse. Even the youngest boys, barely out of childhood, swung with deadly intent. You had to move quickly, anticipate every attack, and counter without hesitation. Failure could mean a bruise today and death tomorrow. The cold was relentless. Frost clung to hair and beard, and fingers turned numb as they gripped weapons. Every movement required effort, Every breath burned in your chest. You learned to ignore the pain, to push beyond what seemed humanly possible. The Vikings believed that only through suffering could one attain the strength needed to survive. Comfort was a weakness. Endurance was a virtue. By mid-morning, the longship loomed by the frozen shore, a vessel carved from mighty oaks, strong enough to brave the wild seas. The warriors lined up, checking their equipment, ensuring that nothing would fail them during the journey. Rowing demanded synchronization, and every man had to match the rhythm perfectly. A single misaligned stroke could capsize the boat or slow it enough for enemies to strike. There was no room for mistakes. Before boarding, a ritual of drinking and oath-taking occurred. Horns of mead were passed from hand to hand, not as celebration, but as a binding promise. Each warrior swore loyalty to the chief and to his brothers in arms. Betrayal was punishable by death, and the oath ensured that the bonds formed in blood and ice would hold, at least for the coming raid. Every word spoken was heavy with meaning, each gesture scrutinized for sincerity. Finally, you stepped onto the longship. The wood was slick with ice, the oars heavy in your hands. The rhythm of the waves, the creak of the vessel, and the biting wind demanded complete focus. As the ship pushed off from the shore, your muscles screamed with exertion. Rowing was grueling, and the cold water that splashed over your hands and arms stole what little warmth remained. Yet, there was no relief, only the endless stretch of fjord before you. Even on the open water, vigilance was required. Raiders could appear from the mist, and rival clans were always a threat. You scanned the horizon, eyes straining against the gray light. Every shadow could conceal an enemy. Every sound could signal an attack. The Vikings were hunters and warriors, and the sea was both their home and their battlefield. Weak men did not last long here, and hesitation could be fatal. Hours passed in the rhythm of row and wind. Hunger gnawed, but there was no meal yet, only the promise of plunder. The cold penetrated your bones, but the camaraderie of the men around you offered a strange warmth. They were your allies, yet rivals in every other sense. Respect had to be earned, and only those who proved themselves in the cold, in the struggle, and in combat could hope to survive the coming raid. By the time the shorelines of their target came into view, exhaustion had set in. Fingers were blue, muscles burned, and yet the anticipation of battle pushed everyone forward. The chief raised his arm, signaling the start of the raid. Shouts of encouragement and war cries erupted, echoing across the fjord. The day had begun with ice, meat, and vigilance, and it would end in steel, blood, and fire. This was life among the Vikings. Each day was a test, each dawn a trial. Weakness could not be hidden, comfort did not exist, and survival demanded constant vigilance. Those who endured would gain glory and honor. Those who faltered would be forgotten, lost to the fjords and the cold. If you thought you could last a day here, you were already being tested, and the first trial had only just begun. The fjord's edge drew closer, and the shoreline began to reveal signs of life. Smoke curling from small huts, fishing nets stretched along the rocks, and the distant clatter of everyday toil. But for a Viking, this was no pastoral scene. It was opportunity and danger intertwined. Every village, every settlement was a test of courage and precision. Hesitation could mean death. Boldness could bring wealth and honor. The warriors tightened their grip on their weapons. Axes were checked, spears sharpened, and shields inspected for cracks. Even the slightest flaw could spell disaster during the chaos of a raid. The chief, standing at the prow, signaled a silent command, and the men obeyed without hesitation. Years of training had molded them into a single unit, each man anticipating the other's move, each step choreographed through countless drills. The longship sliced through the water, silent except for the occasional splash of oars and the hiss of waves against the hull. Mist hung low, shrouding the landing site in an eerie gray veil. Visibility was limited, which worked to the Vikings' advantage. They had learned to use the environment to their benefit, moving like predators through the dawn. Every step, every stroke of the oar, was calculated. There was no room for error. As the ship neared the shore, the warriors braced themselves. Axes were raised, and shields were positioned to absorb the first attack. Even the rookies, whose nerves were still raw, moved with the careful precision of those who had watched countless raids and understood the deadly rhythm of combat. The chief's eyes scanned the landing area, seeking the most vulnerable point to strike. Weakness would be exploited instantly. Then, with a sudden command, the longship grounded itself on the pebbled shore. Feet met solid land, and the warriors erupted into motion. Axes swung, shields collided, and the air filled with the roar of battle cries. The element of surprise was critical, and the Vikings unleashed it with ferocity. Every movement was calculated, every attack purposeful. Hesitation was a luxury none could afford. The first defenders were villagers armed with little more than farming tools. They resisted, but their courage was no match for the trained precision of Viking steel. Axes severed shields, spears pierced wooden doors, and the air was filled with the clang of metal on metal. The rookies realized quickly that this was no game. Injuries were real, and death was always a breath away. Survival required not only strength but speed, cunning, and an unyielding will. Amid the chaos, one of the younger warriors faltered. He tripped over a stone, dropping his shield. Instantly, a seasoned fighter seized the moment, stepping forward to protect him, while another grabbed him and pulled him back into the fray. In Viking society, weakness was tolerated only if it could be corrected quickly. Those who failed entirely were left behind or worse. Lessons in survival were harsh, taught through both experience and brutal demonstration. The chief moved like a shadow through the battlefield, directing men, countering threats, and seizing opportunities. His presence was commanding. The men around him fought harder, inspired by both fear and respect. Every swing of his axe was deliberate, every command precise. Even in the heat of battle, strategy and discipline prevailed over chaos. As the village began to fall under Viking control, the warriors spread out to secure the spoils. Livestock, food, and valuables were claimed swiftly. There was no time for hesitation. Enemies could regroup, reinforcements could arrive, and a moment of greed could cost a life. The Vikings operated like a single organism, each man playing his part, each aware of the consequences of failure. Amid the destruction, the rookies were tested continuously. One was sent to guard a narrow passage, tasked with preventing villagers from escaping and alerting his comrades if danger approached. He trembled at first, heart pounding, but the cold, calculated gaze of the chief reminded him that mistakes were punishable. The rookie's fear transformed into focus. Every shadow, every sound became a potential threat. Survival demanded constant vigilance. By mid-morning, the raid was in full swing. Fires were lit to drive out resistance, but not to destroy indiscriminately. The Vikings valued what could be taken. Homes were ransacked for grain, tools, and silver. Each item seized was a reward for the risk endured. Every movement, every decision carried weight, and the lessons of the longhouse, the cold mornings, the hunger, the discipline, proved crucial. Those who could not keep pace were left behind, lost to the chaos of the raid. The battle intensified when a small group of armed villagers attempted to fight back. Spears were thrown, axes swung, and the air rang with the cries of conflict. For a moment, chaos threatened to overwhelm the careful rhythm of the Vikings, but experience won over panic. Shields were raised in unison, coordinated attacks struck, and the resistance crumbled. The rookies understood then that survival depended not only on physical strength but on attention, awareness, and trust in one's comrades. As the sun climbed higher, exhaustion set in. Muscles burned from continuous combat, lungs burned from exertion, and the cold that had seemed bearable at dawn now gnawed relentlessly at exposed skin. Yet the warriors pressed on. There was no pause, no relief, only the ongoing demand to endure, fight, and claim victory. Weakness had no sanctuary here. In the aftermath of the initial skirmish, the Vikings regrouped. Casualties were assessed, and the spoils of the raid gathered. Men who had struggled were checked, given guidance, and observed carefully. The chief's eyes missed nothing. He remembered every action, every hesitation, and every display of courage. The rookies realized that their actions would be remembered, judged, and either rewarded or used as lessons for the next encounter. The morning had been a crucible. The village had been overrun, its defenses broken, and the warriors had demonstrated both skill and resilience. For some, it had been their first taste of true battle, a lesson harsher than any training in the longhouse. Those who survived were stronger, sharper, and more aware of the harsh reality of Viking life. As the longship prepared to depart, the warriors gathered what they could carry. Loot was stowed carefully, weapons were checked once again, and the men took their positions for the return journey. The fjord stretched before them, cold and unyielding, but it was a familiar path. The journey back would test their endurance, but the lessons of the morning, discipline, vigilance, courage, would guide them. The rookies had changed. They were no longer naive boys. They had faced fire, steel, and fear, and had survived. Yet, the day was far from over. Every dawn among the Vikings brought new challenges, and every moment required unwavering strength. They had learned that survival demanded more than muscle. It demanded awareness, adaptability, and relentless courage. And so, as the longship pushed off into the fjord once more, the warriors rowed with grim determination. The raid had tested them, and for those who survived, it was only the beginning. Life among the Vikings was a constant trial, a relentless test of body and spirit. Weakness could not hide, mercy was fleeting, and every day demanded proof of worth. The fjord faded behind them, replaced by the open sea, vast and merciless. Waves towered like mountains, crashing against the longship with relentless force. The wind shrieked in the rigging, tearing at sails and chilling exposed skin. The rookies, still feeling the adrenaline of their first raid, were quickly reminded that the ocean was as dangerous as any foe. Survival at sea demanded constant vigilance, skill, and the ability to endure discomfort beyond imagination. The chief stood at the prow, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. Rival clans often patrolled these waters, and a single misstep could mean an ambush. The men tightened their grip on their oars, each stroke synchronized, muscles burning as they fought against the tide. Even the seasoned warriors winced at the cold spray, but no complaint passed their lips. In Viking culture, endurance was a mark of honor. Weakness was a stain on the clan. A sudden crack of thunder split the sky, and dark clouds gathered overhead. The weather turned swiftly, as if the sea itself were testing them. Waves crashed over the bow, drenching the men, numbing fingers, and sending salt water into eyes and mouths. The rookies struggled to maintain rhythm, but the veterans corrected every misalignment without hesitation. Coordination was life itself. One wrong stroke could capsize the ship or throw the crew into chaos. The chief's voice rose over the roar of wind and waves, a sharp command that cut through the storm. Orders were given for sail adjustment and oar synchronization. The men responded instantly, each action precise despite the battering storm. Survival depended not on panic but on discipline. Every man understood that the sea was both an ally and an adversary, and mastery over it required both strength and cunning. Hours passed in relentless struggle. The storm showed no mercy, and exhaustion gnawed at every limb. Fingers turned stiff, muscles cramped, and lungs burned with effort. Yet the men pushed forward, driven by a mixture of fear, honor, and the hope of glory. The rookies, who had barely survived the village raid, now faced an even harsher teacher, the unforgiving sea. They learned quickly that endurance was not optional. It was the only way to live. Amid the chaos, the chief plotted their course. The storm was both obstacle and opportunity. Hidden coves and islands could offer shelter, but also conceal rival clans ready to strike. The strategy required careful observation, quick decision-making, and absolute trust in the men rowing beside him. Even the slightest hesitation could mean disaster. The rookies realized that strategy was as essential as strength. Brute force alone would not guarantee survival. As night approached, the storm began to ease, leaving a heavy, eerie calm. The sea, still restless, reflected the dark sky, making the horizon indistinct. The longship pressed on, and the men took turns keeping watch. Fatigue was overwhelming, but vigilance could not waver. Shadows on the water, distant shapes, or unusual movement could signal ambush or opportunity. In the Viking world, complacency was a luxury no one could afford. By dawn, they spotted another longship on the horizon. Rival warriors, just as skilled and just as hungry for glory, moved with calculated precision. The chief signaled the men to ready weapons, tighten shields, and prepare for battle. The rookies' hearts raced. They had faced villagers before, but this was different. These were seasoned fighters, and the stakes were far higher. Survival now depended not only on skill but on unity, trust, and the ability to adapt under pressure. The clash began with a roar. Axes swung, shields collided, and the air was filled with the cries of men and the splash of cold water. The rookies learned quickly that the open sea was a battlefield like no other. One misstep could send a warrior overboard, leaving him at the mercy of the icy waters. The chief moved like a shadow, directing attacks, countering threats, and exploiting every weakness in the enemy formation. Amid the chaos, a young Viking lost his footing, slipping on the slick deck. He caught himself just as an enemy swung an axe. A veteran leapt to his side, pushing him to safety while counterattacking with deadly precision. Lessons were being taught in real time. Fear, hesitation, and error were punished immediately. Survival was earned with every action, every decision, and every swing of steel. The battle raged for hours, each side testing the other, probing for weakness. Waves crashed over the sides, and the longships heaved violently. The rookies, once nervous and uncertain, found themselves moving with the rhythm of battle. They raised shields instinctively, parried attacks, and struck with growing confidence. They began to understand that fear could be harnessed, that adrenaline could sharpen reflexes, and that the bonds of comradeship were essential to surviving the storm and the fight. By midday, the rival longship was disabled. The Vikings boarded swiftly, overwhelming the enemy with coordinated strikes. The spoils of the sea, treasure, weapons, and supplies, were claimed, but not without cost. Several men were injured, their groans mingling with the crash of waves and the calls of a chief. Every wound was a reminder of the harsh reality of life among the Vikings. Survival demanded courage, strength, and unflinching determination. After the battle, the Vikings tended to the wounded, checked their gear, and assessed the spoils. The rookies were exhausted, covered in blood, salt, and sweat. Yet, within them, a transformation had begun. Fear had been replaced with determination, uncertainty with focus, and weakness with resilience. The day had tested them in ways the Longhouse could never replicate. They had faced not only villagers but rivals, storms, and the unforgiving sea, and they had survived. As evening fell, the longship sailed into a sheltered cove. Fires were lit, food was prepared, and the men shared stories of past raids and lessons learned. The rookies listened intently, absorbing knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death in the days to come. They understood that survival among Vikings was not about strength alone. It was about awareness, strategy, endurance, and the bonds of those who rode beside you. The chief, observing the rookies, nodded with approval. They had endured their first true test on the sea, and though many mistakes had been made, the potential was clear. The young men had learned that every day, every battle, and every voyage was a crucible. Only by surviving these trials could a Viking earn respect, honor, and the right to live another day. As night settled over the fjord, the rookies lay near the fire, muscles aching, eyes heavy, and minds racing. They had glimpsed the true life of a Viking, not the tales of glory told in longhouses, but the harsh, relentless reality of ice, steel, and blood. They had endured storms, fought men, and faced their own fear, and they had survived. In the quiet moments before sleep, they understood the unspoken truth. To live among Vikings was to accept that every day was a battle, every dawn a test, and every choice a matter of life and death. Weakness could not hide, fear could not rule, and mercy was fleeting. If you could endure one day, you might endure another. If you could endure 1,000 trials, you might earn your place among the legends. The longship cut through calmer waters as the fjord's familiar cliffs appeared on the horizon. The storm had passed, leaving the sea deceptively tranquil. The warriors, still bruised and weary, rowed with steady rhythm, their muscles screaming in protest. The adrenaline of battle had faded, replaced by aching limbs and the cold sting of sea spray. Even in these quieter moments, survival demanded attention. One lapse could undo everything they had endured. The rookies, though exhausted, were alert. They had survived their first true raid, faced a rival clan, and endured a storm that had tested even the veterans. Yet, the chief's eyes swept over them, noting every action, every hesitation, every moment of courage. Viking life offered no reprieve. Lessons continued even after the battle. Weakness would be remembered, strength rewarded, and mistakes scrutinized. As the longship approached the landing point, the men began preparations to disembark. Weapons were checked once more, shields cleaned, and injured comrades assisted. Even in victory, discipline remained paramount. The Vikings had learned that pride alone could lead to catastrophe. Every detail mattered: the proper handling of spoils, the care of the wounded, and the readiness for any last-minute threat. Once ashore, the warriors carried their spoils to the longhouse, a massive wooden structure that served as both home and fortress. Fires were stoked, and the air filled with the scent of roasting meat. The men moved with practiced efficiency, storing loot and tending to their weapons. Even after the chaos of battle, the routines of Viking life demanded order. Those who could not maintain it risked being left behind, or worse. The rookies were given tasks that tested both their endurance and their attention to detail. Some carried heavy sacks of grain and tools, others polished weapons or repaired shields. Each task, though seemingly mundane, was part of a larger lesson. Strength alone would not suffice. Survival required diligence, focus, and respect for the structure of the clan. Every action was observed, every mistake remembered. The chief gathered the men inside the longhouse. The room, dimly lit by flickering torches, smelled of smoke, iron, and sweat. The veterans shared stories of previous raids, emphasizing strategy, caution, and the importance of unity. The rookies listened intently, absorbing knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death in future encounters. Every word carried weight. The lessons of the past were survival tools for the future. One by one, the rookies were questioned about their actions during the raid. The chief asked how they had responded to danger, how they had protected their comrades, and how they had handled fear. The answers were scrutinized, corrected, and evaluated. In Viking society, accountability was absolute. Courage was expected, mistakes were tolerated only if learned from, and weakness could not be hidden. The evening passed in a rhythm of reflection and preparation. Fires burned bright, meals were shared, and the wounded received care. The rookies began to understand that life among Vikings was not only about battle, it was about endurance, discipline, and the unspoken bonds between men. The trust forged in combat extended beyond the battlefield, binding the warriors together in a network of reliance and mutual respect. As night deepened, the longhouse fell into a relative quiet. The rookies, still sore and exhausted, lay on straw mats, their thoughts racing. They had faced raw combat, storms, and their own limitations. They had seen death, endured fear, and survived. Sleep came in short, restless bursts, but even in rest, the lessons continued. Survival demanded awareness at all times, vigilance even in safety. The chief walked among the sleeping men, checking on those recovering from injuries and noting the rookies' reactions to the day. His gaze was both stern and calculating, a reminder that leadership required constant vigilance and foresight. Those who survived the day earned his respect, but the path to becoming a true warrior was long and unforgiving. By dawn, the longhouse was alive once more. The morning routines began: the bitter cold, the raw meat, and the scrutiny of every action. The rookies rose with the veterans, muscles stiff, bodies aching, but minds sharpened. Today, they would face training anew, honing their skills for the next raid, the next battle, and the next storm. Viking life was relentless. Survival demanded continuous improvement, and comfort was never granted. Lessons from the previous day were reinforced. Training included simulated combat, rowing drills, and strategy exercises. Every movement, every decision was observed, corrected, and tested. Those who faltered were pushed harder. Those who excelled were acknowledged but never allowed complacency. The rookies realized that endurance was measured not in single acts but in consistency, resilience, and adaptability. During the midday meal, discussions focused on tactics, history, and the art of warfare. The veterans shared hard-won insights: how to read the wind, anticipate enemy movements, and maintain cohesion under stress. The rookies absorbed every detail, understanding that knowledge was as vital as strength. Survival in the Viking world required a balance of intellect, skill, and courage. As the sun began its descent, the chief gathered the men for a final assessment. The rookies were asked to recount their experiences, identify mistakes, and propose strategies for improvement. Their reflections were evaluated, guidance provided, and lessons etched into memory. In this society, education was harsh, immediate, and practical. Learning was a matter of life and death, and experience was the ultimate teacher. The evening concluded with a ceremony honoring the bravery and resilience demonstrated during the raid and storm. The chief spoke of valor, unity, and the importance of each warrior's contribution. Rewards were given to those who had excelled, advice to those who needed improvement. The rookies felt the weight of both recognition and responsibility. They had survived, but the journey to becoming true Vikings had only begun. As night enveloped the fjord, the longhouse quieted. Fires burned low, casting shadows on the walls and illuminating the faces of those who had endured the day's trials. The rookies lay on their mats, reflecting on the harsh lessons, the pain, and the fleeting moments of triumph. They had faced the storm, battled enemies, and survived the unforgiving sea. Yet, they knew that life among Vikings was an endless cycle of challenges. Sleep came at last, tentative and uneasy. The rookies understood that tomorrow would bring new trials, training, raids, storms, and the constant demand to prove their worth. They had learned that survival was never guaranteed, that every day was a test, and that only the vigilant, strong, and cunning could hope to endure. Viking life was unforgiving, relentless, and exhilarating, a crucible that forged men into legends. By the first light of the next dawn, the rookies would rise again. The longhouse would stir with the bitter cold, the smell of raw meat, and the clatter of weapons. The cycle would continue, as it had for centuries. Those who endured would grow stronger, wiser, and more formidable. Those who faltered would be left behind, lost to the frost, the waves, or the history that did not remember them. And so, life among Vikings continued, a relentless dance of strength, strategy, endurance, and courage. Each day was a test, each moment an opportunity to prove oneself, and each challenge a reminder that survival demanded everything one could give. The rookies had survived their first day. The journey to true Vikinghood had only begun. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint tang of smoke from the previous night's fires. The longhouse buzzed with activity as warriors prepared for another day. The rookies, now slightly hardened by their first raid in the storm at sea, moved with more confidence. Still, the chief's sharp eyes missed nothing, and every action was scrutinized. Survival among Vikings demanded constant vigilance. Comfort was fleeting, and weakness could not hide. Weapons were polished, shields repaired, and armor checked for cracks. Every item had to be battle-ready. A single broken shield or dull axe could cost a life in the next raid. The rookies handled their gear with growing dexterity, aware that preparation was as important as strength. In Viking society, foresight and meticulousness were signs of a warrior who could endure, while carelessness marked the weak. The chief called a meeting, outlining the day's plans. A rival clan had been spotted along the coast, known for their cunning tactics and fierce combat skills. The task was not only to raid but to demonstrate dominance, to send a message that challenged warriors would be met with force. The rookies listened intently, absorbing strategies, learning to anticipate threats, and understanding the balance of aggression and caution. The longship was ready by mid-morning, sails hoisted, and oars at the ready. The warriors boarded with practiced efficiency. Even after several raids, the ocean demanded respect. Waves lapped against the hull, cold and relentless, reminding everyone that the sea could be as deadly as any enemy. Coordination and unity were essential. One misstep could spell disaster, especially when facing another clan of seasoned fighters. The journey to the rivals' coast was tense. Every shadow on the horizon, every flicker of movement in the water was scrutinized. The rookies, though more confident, still felt the weight of uncertainty. Experience alone could not guarantee safety. Awareness and adaptability were equally vital. The veterans moved with calm precision, teaching the rookies through example, demonstrating how to read the wind, the waves, and the subtle signals of danger. As they neared the coast, scouts reported movement on the cliffs above. The rival clan had spotted them, and the element of surprise was lost. The chief's expression hardened. Now, strategy and quick thinking would determine the outcome. Orders were shouted, shields locked, and weapons ready. The rookies felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, nerves coiling as the impending clash approached. Survival demanded sharpness, courage, and absolute trust in their comrade. The first arrows rained down from the cliffs. The Vikings raised shields, forming tight formations, absorbing the initial volley while advancing steadily. Every movement was calculated. The rookies, who had once hesitated during their first raid, now mirrored the veterans' precision, stepping in unison, raising shields, and countering attacks. Fear had not disappeared, but it had transformed into focus, a weapon as sharp as any axe. Climbing the cliffs proved treacherous. Rocks shifted underfoot, loose soil gave way, and enemy attacks continued. The rookies learned to rely on one another, supporting fallen comrades and maintaining the rhythm of advance. Every misstep was corrected swiftly, every weakness covered by the experienced warriors beside them. Viking life demanded interdependence. No man could survive alone. At the top, chaos erupted. The rival clan met them with fury, weapons clashing, shields splintering, and the air filled with shouts of challenge. Combat was close, personal, and brutal. The rookies swung axes, parried strikes, and felt the sting of blows they barely avoided. Survival was a matter of instinct, timing, and the ability to read both the enemy and the environment. Hesitation could cost a life, but overcommitment could be fatal as well. Amid the battle, a young Viking faced an enemy twice his size. Fear gripped him, but instinct took over. He dodged a swing, countered with an axe, and found a weak point in his opponent's guard. The strike was decisive. The rookies learned quickly that courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Every action was measured, every decision critical. The battle continued for hours. The rival clan was formidable, but the Vikings' experience, strategy, and unity began to prevail. Slowly, the enemy was pushed back, forced to retreat from the cliffs. The rookies, though battered and exhausted, had grown immensely. They had faced seasoned warriors, navigated treacherous terrain, and endured the relentless pace of combat. Survival demanded not just strength, but intelligence, adaptability, and resilience. When the fight ended, the battlefield was strewn with the remnants of struggle, broken shields, discarded weapons, and the wounded, both friend and foe. The Vikings regrouped, assessing the damage, aiding the injured, and securing the spoils. The rookies, though bruised and weary, felt a surge of pride. They had survived a true test, proving themselves not only to their comrades but to themselves. The chief addressed the men, emphasizing lessons learned and strategies for improvement. Every mistake was analyzed, every act of courage acknowledged. The rookies understood that Viking life was a continuous cycle of learning and proving oneself. Success was not measured by survival alone, but by the ability to adapt, endure, and grow stronger with each challenge. As the longship sailed home, the veterans and rookies alike reflected on the day's events. The rookies, once inexperienced and fearful, now carried the marks of battle, both visible and invisible. They had endured fear, pain, and uncertainty, and emerged stronger. The lessons of the longhouse, the storm, and the raid had coalesced into a deeper understanding of what it meant to live as a Viking. By evening, the longhouse rose in view, a sanctuary of warmth and order. Fires were lit, meals prepared, and the men tended to their wounds. The rookies, exhausted but elated, realized that every challenge faced, every danger survived, brought them closer to the ideal of a true warrior. Viking life was harsh, unforgiving, and relentless, but it also forged strength, courage, and unity among those who endured. Night fell, and the longhouse settled into quiet reflection. The rookies lay on straw mats, bruised but unbroken, minds racing with the day's lessons. They had faced enemy warriors, navigated treacherous terrain, and survived. They had learned that fear could be harnessed, strength must be disciplined, and unity was essential. Viking life demanded total commitment, and each day tested every fiber of one's being. As sleep claimed them, the rookies understood the truth of their existence. Survival among Vikings was not granted, it was earned. Every day was a trial, every dawn a challenge, and every battle a lesson. Weakness could not hide, hesitation could not linger, and mercy was fleeting. They had survived, but the path to true mastery had only begun. The longhouse was filled with the crackling of fire and the low murmur of tired warriors. The rookies, still sore from the battle on the cliffs, tried to rest, but their minds churned restlessly. Victory brought pride, but it also opened the door to new expectations. A Viking's worth was measured not by one success, but by the consistency of his courage. And tomorrow, the chief had promised, would test them even further. Before dawn, a horn echoed across the village, its sharp cry cutting through the early mist. The rookies rose, muscles aching, but no one dared move slowly. Among Vikings, discipline was not a ritual. It was survival. Outside, the air bit at their skin, cold and sharp, driving away the remnants of sleep. Men gathered in a tight formation, breath clouding in the chilled morning air. The chief stood before them, posture rigid, eyes unforgiving. Today was no ordinary day. It was the day of the Oath of Blood, a tradition bound by honor and necessity. Every warrior, new or experienced, was required to swear loyalty to the clan before embarking on a major raid. The raid they now prepared for was unlike the smaller skirmishes the rookies had survived so far. This one would take them far across the sea, toward heavily defended settlements known for fierce resistance. A stone bowl filled with animal blood was placed at the center. One by one, warriors approached, dipped a finger in the blood, and smeared a mark across their chest. For the rookies, this moment felt heavier than any battle. It was a declaration. From this day, your life belongs to the clan, and the clan's fate belongs to you. As they made the mark, the veterans watched closely. The slightest tremor, the smallest hint of hesitation, was remembered. Among Vikings, trust had to be absolute. A man who faltered in oath might falter in battle, and such weakness was a danger greater than any enemy blade. When the ritual was complete, preparations for the journey began. This time, the longship had to be equipped for a voyage lasting weeks, not days. Barrels of fresh water, salted meat, rope, tar, spare oars, and repair tools were loaded carefully. Every supply had a purpose, and forgetting even a single item could doom the entire crew. Rookies learned quickly how to lash barrels to prevent them from rolling, how to seal crates with pitch, and how to balance the ship's weight so it cut smoothly through the waves. By midday, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The sea churned, dark and unpredictable. Sailing today meant risking everything, but delaying could cost them the element of timing. The chief raised his hand, signaling silence. His voice carried across the shore. We sail. A Viking does not wait for calm waters. We conquer them. The rookies swallowed hard. They had survived one storm already, but the veterans' tense expressions warned that this one would be far worse. Still, hesitation had no place here. They boarded the longship, securing their positions, gripping the oars tightly as the waves began to rise. As the ship pushed away from shore, the wind howled, whipping salty spray across their faces. The longship creaked under the pressure of the tide. Waves slammed against the hull with increasing force, sending shudders through the wood. The younger warriors struggled to keep rhythm, but the veterans barked orders, steadying the pace. A longship survived storms only when every man moved as one. Hours passed as the storm intensified. The sky darkened to a bruised gray, thunder rolling like distant war drums. Rain poured in sheets, blinding the warriors and flooding the deck. The rookies felt their arms burn, muscles screaming as they fought the overwhelming force of the sea. Missing a stroke meant knocking another rower off balance, risking chaos. The veterans shouted over the roaring wind, urging them on, reminding them that strength meant nothing without discipline. At the storm's peak, a massive wave rose in front of the longship, a towering wall of water threatening to swallow them whole. The chief roared a command, and men braced themselves. The ship climbed the wave, wood groaning, shields rattling. For a terrifying moment, it felt like they would tip backward, but the warriors leaned forward, shifting their weight, shouting in unison as the ship crested the wave and crashed down on the other side. The impact knocked several rookies off their seats, but they scrambled up quickly, drenched and trembling. Viking life left no room for collapse. Every moment was a test, and every failure could be fatal. They returned to rowing, soaked and freezing, but alive. As night fell, the storm finally eased. The sky cleared enough to reveal the faint glow of distant stars. Exhausted, the rookies slumped over their oars, chests heaving. The veterans allowed a moment of rest but kept watchful eyes. Storms often brought hidden dangers, floating debris, damaged ropes, or weakened planks. At the chief's order, men inspected every part of the longship. A crack in the hull was found near the bow. Rookies rushed to help the carpenters patch it with tarred planks and rope. Their hands were numb from cold, but the urgency drove them. A leaking hull meant death, and none of them had any intention of dying with the coast still far away. By midnight, the sea had calmed to a steady roll. The warriors lit a small shielded torch to warm their hands, but the light was kept low. Enemies were not the only threats at sea. Pirates, rival clans, and even monstrous stories whispered among sailors haunted these waters. The rookies asked quietly whether the tales were true, but the veterans simply smirked. In Viking life, it didn't matter whether the monsters were real. The sea itself was monster enough. The next morning brought a faint sight of distant land. Relief mixed with tension. Their destination was near, but landfall was always dangerous. Settlements could be prepared, guarded, or worse, waiting in ambush. The chief ordered silence as the longship approached the coastline. Rookies tightened their grips on weapons, feeling the familiar spike of adrenaline. This raid would be unlike the earlier skirmishes. The enemy was wealthy, fortified, and alert. The Vikings' arrival would test every lesson learned: unity, courage, discipline, and the ability to make split-second decisions under crushing pressure. The rookies exchanged tense glances. They had survived storms, battles, and the grueling expectations of their clan. But now, as the longship closed in on the shore, they sensed a new truth. The hardest part of being a Viking was not surviving a single day. It was surviving every day after. Dawn crept slowly across the horizon, painting the sky in muted shades of gray and pale gold. The Vikings' longship floated quietly in a small inlet, hidden by jagged rocks and twisted pines. The rookies stood in tense silence, their breath hanging in the cold morning air. Every man knew the weight of the moment. Storms and skirmishes were one thing. Raiding a fortified settlement was another entirely. The chief crouched near the prow, his eyes fixed on the distant buildings barely visible through the mist. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, unaware of the danger drifting toward them. He signaled for the warriors to gather. They huddled close, shields slung across their backs, weapons wrapped to avoid clattering. "This will be quick," the chief whispered, voice low but firm. "We strike at first light. No hesitation. No mercy. Move together. Break their line before they wake." Every rookie swallowed hard, nodding. Fear throbbed beneath their ribs, but so did determination. This was the moment their training, pain, and endurance had prepared them for. As the sun's first rays touched the rooftops, the Vikings silently paddled closer. The oars dipped into the water without a sound. Hearts pounded in anticipation. The village grew clearer. Wooden fences, storage huts, a small tower where a single guard paced lazily, unaware of his fate. At the chief's command, the longship glided onto the shore. Warriors leapt off, boots sinking into wet sand. The rookies followed, gripping axes and spears so tightly their knuckles turned white. The only sound was the soft crash of waves behind them. They sprinted forward. The first kill came almost instantly. A guard walking between two huts froze at the sight of armed men charging out of the mist. He opened his mouth to shout, but an arrow struck him in the throat. He fell without a sound. The Vikings didn't break stride, but stealth never lasts long. A shout tore through the settlement, a panicked cry that spread like wildfire. Doors swung open. Villagers scrambled for weapons. A bell clanged from the watchtower. The raid had begun. The Vikings smashed into the village. Shields up, axes flashing. Chaos erupted as defenders rushed to meet them. The rookies felt the shock of the first clash. Shields hitting shields, blades meeting bone, screams mixing with the thunder of footsteps. One rookie faced a defender armed with a long spear. The spear jabbed toward him, missing his face by inches. Panic surged, but training took over. He slammed his shield forward, knocking the man off balance, then drove his axe into the defender's side. Warm blood splashed across his arm. The rookies had learned that battles were not elegant. They were brutal, fast, and unforgiving. A second wave of defenders stormed from the longhouse, better armed and better prepared. The Vikings tightened their formation. Shields locked, axes raised. The two lines crashed together with a force that jarred teeth and bruised bones. One rookie slipped on wet ground as an enemy blade slashed across his shoulder. He fell, crying out, but a veteran grabbed him by the collar and dragged him back into the formation. "On your feet," the veteran barked, "or you'll die on your knees." The rookie scrambled upright, pain burning through him, but he fought on. In Viking life, injuries were meaningless until the raid was done. The defenders lit torches, hurling them at the Vikings to break their formation. One torch landed near a wooden hut, igniting the wall. Flames spread quickly, crackling as smoke billowed upward. The rookies coughed but pushed forward. Fire was a weapon for both sides now. The chief roared an order, signaling the warriors to break formation and flank the defenders. The rookies sprinted after the veterans, circling around burning huts, dodging debris, and lunging into combat whenever an enemy blocked their way. For the first time, the rookies saw true chaos. Children screaming, women dragging wounded men to safety, livestock stampeding, flames licking at rooftops. The village was transforming into a battlefield, every direction filled with noise, danger, and smoke. The rookies found themselves cornered near a storage hut by a group of defenders wielding spears and shields. It was 3 rookies against 5 experienced fighters. Panic surged. The defenders advanced in a tight formation, spears thrusting with deadly precision. One rookie's shield splintered under a spear strike. Another stumbled backward. The third, hard hammering, realized they were seconds from dying. Then the chief appeared, crashing into the defenders with a fury that stole their breath. His axe split a shield in half, sending its wielder sprawling. The rookies rallied, pushing forward with renewed strength. Together, they broke through the formation, turning what seemed like certain death into victory. But victories came with a cost. As the rookies regrouped, they saw a fallen comrade, a young warrior barely older than themselves, lying face down near a burning hut. His shield was cracked, his helmet dented. He had fought bravely, but bravery was no shield against fate. A heavy silence fell over them, even as the battle raged on. For the first time, the rookies understood the full truth. Viking life was not just about fighting. It was about watching men you trained beside fall, knowing it could be you next. The raid continued, pushing toward the center of the settlement. The last defenders made a final stand near the chieftain's hall. The Vikings burst through the doors, steel clashing against steel, shouts echoing off the wooden walls. A defender swung wildly at a rookie, the blade grazing his cheek. Blood trickled down, but the rookie countered, driving his axe into the man's shoulder. His hands trembled afterward, not from fear, but from realization. He was becoming what the clan demanded, a warrior forged in fire and loss. When the final defender fell, the village went silent except for the crackling of flames and the ragged breaths of exhausted warriors. The chief surveyed the destruction, nodding once. The raid was successful, but not without cost. As the Vikings gathered supplies and tended to the wounded, the rookies stood together, shaken but alive. The village smoldered behind them, a grim reminder of the price of survival. They were no longer the unsure, nervous men who had stepped off the longship at dawn. They had taken their first step into true Vikinghood, but the harsh reality loomed. Surviving the raid was only the beginning. The journey back home, and the consequences awaiting, would test them even more. The longship pushed away from the ruined settlement, its hull heavy with spoils and its crew heavy with exhaustion. Dawn's pale light stretched across the sea, revealing battered shields and weary faces. The rookies sat quietly, their thoughts circling the battle behind them. Victory felt colder than they expected, shaped not by glory but by the weight of loss. Waves slapped gently against the ship, a stark contrast to the chaos they had left ashore. Yet beneath the calm surface lurked tension. The veterans murmured among themselves, casting occasional glances at the rookies. Some saw promise, others saw burden. The sea had its own voice, whispering that danger was never far, even after a successful raid. As the coastline faded, a sharp crack echoed from the ship's bow. Warriors rushed forward, discovering a fresh split in the wood, damage left by the storm days earlier. Water seeped in slowly but steadily. The chief ordered immediate repairs, and men scrambled to patch the breach. The rookies joined in, hands shaking not from fear, but from urgency. Working shoulder to shoulder, they stuffed tar-soaked fibers into the crack and hammered makeshift planks into place. Every second counted. The sea was unforgiving, and a single weakness could doom them all. The rookies felt the veterans' scrutiny, their judgment heavy as iron. One slip would confirm every doubt whispered behind their backs. When the leak slowed, the warriors retreated to their benches, breathing hard. But relief was short-lived. The sky darkened, clouds gathering like a brewing argument. The chief called for preparation, yet some veterans muttered about pushing too far, too soon. Their words carried irritation, anger sharpened by fatigue and grief. Two veterans began arguing openly, voices rising above the wind. One blamed the chief for choosing a risky route, the other defended him fiercely. The rookies exchanged tense glances, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. Viking unity was a shield, but it cracked easily when pride and exhaustion collided. The chief silenced them with a glare, yet the damage lingered beneath the surface. Trust, once shaken, didn't heal quickly. The rookies felt a shift in the air, a new threat born not of enemy blades but of their own clan's discord. A divided ship was more dangerous than a storm. As night fell, the sea grew restless. Swells lifted the longship like a toy, rocking it violently. Men gripped their oars and ropes as lightning flickered on the horizon. The ship groaned under the strain, the earlier repairs tested by every rising wave. The rookies braced themselves, remembering the storm they had survived before. Wind lashed against their faces, rain hammering their helmets. The veterans shouted commands, trying to maintain rhythm, but tension made cooperation brittle. One mistake nearly capsized them. A rookie misread the order and shifted weight too soon, throwing the rowers off balance. The longship lurched dangerously. A veteran grabbed the rookie by the collar, roaring with fury. The rookie apologized breathlessly, but anger crackled in the air. The chief intervened, reminding them all that survival demanded unity. The storm didn't care who was seasoned and who was new. It swallowed all without hesitation. Gradually, the worst of the storm passed, leaving the men drenched and shivering. The longship bobbed on calmer waters, but the warriors' spirits remained shaken. The rookies knew they had narrowly avoided disaster, and the veterans knew their anger had nearly cost them control. At dawn, the sea stretched calm and endless. The chief gathered the crew, addressing the storm, both the one they had faced and the one brewing within. He spoke of honor, discipline, and the thin line between strength and foolishness. His words carried weight. Even the veterans bowed their heads. The rookies listened intently, realizing that leadership was not simply issuing orders but carrying the burden of every decision. They understood more now. A raid's danger didn't end once the sword stopped. The journey home was a trial of its own, revealing cracks in loyalty and character. As the day progressed, land finally appeared as a faint shadow on the horizon. Relief spread through the crew, though quietly. They had endured battles, storms, wounds, and conflict, emerging battered but alive. The rookies felt a strange blend of pride and dread. Home meant safety, but it also meant facing judgment. When the longhouse roofs finally came into view, men straightened, exhaustion replaced by a quiet determination. They would return with stories, scars, and lessons carved into their bones. The rookies understood that the sea had tested them as fiercely as any enemy, and that tomorrow, the clan would test them again. The longship slid across the calm morning waters, its battered hull gleaming with salt and dried blood. As the village shoreline emerged from the mist, the warriors straightened, fatigue melting into solemn pride. Smoke rose from familiar longhouses, curling into the gray sky. The rookies felt their hearts hammer. They had left as untested boys, but they returned changed. Villagers gathered along the rocky shore, eyes narrowing as they counted heads. Every raid brought gain, but it also delivered loss, and the sea never gave back all who ventured into its grasp. Mothers, wives, elders, and children scanned the ship, searching for familiar faces. The tension in the air was thick enough to silence even the gulls above. As the longship touched land, hands reached out to pull it ashore. Warriors leapt down, heavy boots crushing wet sand. Some embraced family, others walked silently past them, carrying grief behind stoic eyes. The rookies watched, realizing that even home felt different now. War had carved something new into their bones that no hearth could warm away. The chief stepped forward, raising his arm for silence. His voice carried across the crowd, recounting the raid's victory and acknowledging the fallen. Each name spoken was a weight dropped upon the earth, echoing in the chests of those who remained. The rookies felt the reality settle. Triumph meant nothing without remembering the cost carved into the clan's heart. Women approached with bowls of warm broth, pressing them into trembling hands. Steam rose into the cold air, carrying the scent of herbs and smoked meat. The rookies drank eagerly, the warmth spreading through their aching muscles. Yet even comfort felt strange, as if their bodies no longer belonged to this quiet, peaceful place they had once called home. Inside the longhouse, fires roared to life as warriors gathered in a loose circle. Shields were hung along the walls, bloodied and cracked, each one a silent testament to survival. The rookies took their seats at the far end, unsure whether they had earned the right to sit among seasoned warriors. The veterans watched them with unreadable expressions. A feast began. Roasted meat, thick bread, and mead poured into rough wooden cups. Laughter slowly replaced the earlier tension, though it carried a hollow edge. The rookies joined in cautiously, their minds replaying the raid. Every swing of an axe, every scream, every fallen man felt closer in memory now that the danger was gone. As the fire crackled, the chief called for the rookies to step forward. The longhouse fell silent. One by one, they approached the center, standing beneath the gaze of the entire clan. Their hearts pounded, but they held their shoulders firm. The chief studied them, his face carved with both pride and severity, testing whether they would flinch under scrutiny. He spoke of each rookie's actions, their mistakes, their courage, their resilience under pressure. Praise was direct, but so were criticisms, for the Vikings valued honesty above comfort. The rookies listened with burning cheeks, feeling both exposed and validated. Each word etched itself into their memory, shaping the warriors they were becoming. Then came the final test, acceptance or rejection. A Viking did not become a true raider simply by surviving. He had to be recognized by the clan. The chief lifted a carved drinking horn, offering it to the first rookie. The hall erupted in cheers. Acceptance granted. One by one, the rookies drank, earning their place among the warriors at last. Relief washed over them, but so did a new weight. Now they were bound not just by survival, but by duty. The veterans approached, clapping them on the shoulders, welcoming them with rough smiles. For the first time, the rookies felt like part of something larger, something forged by fire, blood, and unspoken loyalty. But celebrations never erased vigilance. Even as the feast continued, elders whispered about rival clans preparing their own raids. The sea, though calm tonight, promised future storms. The rookies realized that becoming warriors didn't end their trials. It simply opened the door to greater challenges lurking beyond the horizon. Outside, the moon cast silver light across the village. The rookies slipped out of the longhouse, breathing in the cold air. They gazed at the fjord, remembering storms that nearly swallowed them and battles that nearly broke them. The reflections of torches shimmered on the water's surface like restless spirits calling them back. One rookie touched the scar forming on his shoulder, feeling its sting. It was a mark he had earned, a reminder that fear could be conquered, and that survival demanded constant sacrifice. Standing beneath the vast sky, he understood the truth whispered by every Viking before him. Peace was only a pause between trials. As night deepened, the rookies returned to the longhouse, taking their seats among the warriors, not beside them, but as one of them. The crackling fire illuminated their hardened expressions. They had returned home, but they were not the same. And somewhere in the darkness, the next challenge stirred, waiting to test them again. The cold did not simply exist in the Viking world. It judged every man who woke beneath its pale sky. As you stepped outside, it clung to your skin with teeth as sharp as a wolf's. Frost crackled under your boots, and even the air felt heavy with challenge. You quickly learned that warmth was a privilege, not a promise, and you had earned nothing yet among these hardened warriors. The longhouse stirred with life behind you, warriors awakening with low grumbles as they stretched stiff limbs. Their breaths rose like smoke from a battlefield, each exhale rough and tired. No one spoke of comfort. Complaints were a luxury not tolerated here. A Viking proved himself not by what he endured quietly, but by what he never acknowledged as pain in the first place. Your hands were already numb as you approached the morning's first task, hauling frozen barrels of water from the shore. The ice cracked loudly as you struck it open, and splinters flew like tiny shards of glass. A warrior beside you laughed, his voice deep and unbothered. To him, cold was merely a reminder he was alive. To you, it was a threat sharpening its claws. Breakfast was not a warm comfort but a test of will. Strips of raw or half-frozen meat were handed out, tough enough to make your jaw ache. The Vikings tore into theirs with barely a pause, talking between bites about raids, debts, and rival clans. You forced yourself to chew through the icy flesh, knowing any hesitation would mark you as soft, and softness was as dangerous as an enemy blade. Then came the ritual of checking the boats, an act as sacred as prayer. Each longship demanded loyalty, and each seat on board was a battlefield of its own. Men guarded their places fiercely, for losing a seat meant losing a future raid, losing honor, and losing spoils. You felt several suspicious glances as you approached. Vikings trusted strength, not newcomers who had yet to prove whether they deserved breath. You inspected your designated spot, searching for signs that someone had attempted to claim it overnight. A missing rope, a shifted shield, even a small carving scratched into the wood could signal betrayal. Here, rivalry hid behind friendly smiles, and only fools walked unguarded. Today, your spot remained untouched, but the tension coiling around your neck reminded you that this peace was temporary. Training began shortly after sunrise, though the sun barely pierced the clouds. Warriors swung axes heavy enough to break weaker men's wrists. You joined the circle, the wooden handle rough beneath your freezing fingers. Every strike sent painful shocks through your arms, but stopping wasn't an option. A Viking captain watched from the edge, his cold eyes weighing your worth like a merchant judging flawed armor. When a warrior named Ragnvald stepped forward to spar with you, the others grinned knowingly. He was large, loud, and fond of testing new blood. The moment the fight began, his attacks fell like thunder, each one threatening to send you sprawling. But you held your ground, barely deflecting, barely breathing. Every heartbeat was a promise to survive, even if the day seemed determined to break you. The match ended when you managed to dodge a heavy swing and land a strike against his shoulder. It was not enough to win, but enough to show spine. The circle erupted in laughter and shouts, some mocking, some impressed. Ragnvald clapped your back so hard your knees nearly buckled. In the Viking world, pain was a greeting, and survival, just barely, was the closest thing to praise. Night wrapped the village in thick darkness, broken only by the orange glow of scattered torches. You stood near the longhouse, still trembling from the day's battles, both on land and within yourself. The cold bit at your wounds, but you felt strangely grounded. This had been the longest day of your life, a trial that gnawed at your bones and questioned every breath you took. Inside, warriors celebrated their narrow escape from disaster. Tankards slammed, songs rose, and laughter shook the wooden walls. You watched them, men who treated danger like a game and death like a familiar guest. You realized survival among Vikings was never about strength alone. It was about accepting chaos as your companion and fear as a rope you learned to grip, not flee from. Ragnvald approached you, his massive silhouette blocking the firelight. He studied you with a seriousness rare for him. "You did not fall today," he said quietly. "Not in battle, not in spirit. Many newcomers break before sunset." His hand landed on your shoulder, heavy as an anvil. It wasn't praise, it was recognition, and in the Viking world, that was far more valuable. The Jarl soon joined the circle of noise, lifting his horn to silence the hall. His eyes swept across the warriors, stopping on you for a moment longer than expected. "Today we saw courage," he declared. "Not perfect skill, not hardened strength, but courage. And courage feeds the gods more than fear." The hall erupted again, though some glances still measured your worth cautiously. As the celebration roared on, you stepped outside, meeting air untouched by smoke and sweat. The fjord lay silent, its waters black and cold as steel. The longship floated gently, creaking like an old beast resting after a hunt. You approached it, touching the carved prow. This ship, this day, these people, none of it felt like a world you belonged to. Yet somehow it now held a piece of you. You remembered the morning's freezing pain, the rough training, the brutal fight, and the terrifying raid that tested every instinct you had. You remembered thinking you would die before the sun set, but you didn't. And in the Viking world, that was the only passport one needed to remain among them. Survival itself was your proof, your offering, your right to be counted. A quiet voice broke the stillness. It was the young shield maker from earlier, carrying a newly repaired shield on her back. "You lasted the day," she said with a small smile. "Few do, even fewer return for a second one." You laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because it was true. Surviving one day did not promise survival tomorrow, but it meant you had earned the chance. The sky shifted as faint stars appeared overhead, shimmering above the dark water. You felt the weight of exhaustion settle into your limbs, but beneath it pulsed something steady, a stubborn fire you didn't know you carried. You weren't a Viking, not yet, maybe never, but you had walked through their world, and it had not destroyed you. That meant something. When you returned inside, the Jarl raised his horn once more. "Tomorrow," he announced, "those who prove themselves will join the next raid." A cheer exploded, and several warriors looked at you with raised brows. The message was clear. You had a choice. Walk away now and keep your life, or stay and risk losing it for glory, brotherhood, and a place in their legends. Your heart pounded as you understood the truth. You wouldn't survive a day among Vikings, unless you chose to. Because surviving here was not an accident. It was a decision, a refusal to quit, a willingness to embrace the brutality carved into every heartbeat of this world. And as you raised a horn handed to you by Ragnvald, you knew your answer. Whatever tomorrow held, you were ready to face it.